As a young girl, I remember paying frequent visits to my grandfather, who worked as the sole gravedigger in the old Irish cemetery near my house. My mom would take me and my older brothers there in the afternoons to bring my grandfather lunch. We'd often find him taking a smoke break in the tool shed attached to the back end of the cemetery, straw hat shading his eyes, an oversized green jacket tied around his waist. My brothers and I would beg him to let us ride in the giant green tractor he used to get around the cemetery. He'd occasionally oblige, and we'd get to be carted around the grounds while gazing in wonder at all the stones. I remember my oldest brother referring to the masses of gravestones as pieces to a chessboard. It was fun thinking that we were surrounded by pawns, kings, and queens, forever frozen in place. There were days where I got the chance to watch my grandfather at work. Shovel in hand, he would muster all the strength he had in his lanky body to break through solid ground, hoist the dirt over his shoulder, and bring the shovel blade down to do it over and over again. It was laborious work for a 75-year-old man, but he did it with unwavering grit and over a decade of experience. The sight of my grandfather standing 6 feet in a grave was unnerving, but he admired the craft and thought nothing could be more honorable and sacred than preparing one's eternal resting place. At the time, I didn't think there was anything noble about digging gigantic holes, but now I understand his point. Years go by, and my grandfather eventually died after a prolonged battle with cancer. He's buried in the same cemetery he once dug graves in, his gravestone standing at the cemetery's apex. It's a tall rose gold-colored cross etched with Celtic designs, an homage to his Irish heritage, a work of art surrounded by decrepit, nameless stones. Since my grandfather's death, my mother and I visited at least once a week, but unfortunately this habit waned as the years went by. Yet out of all of our visits, one in particular stands out in my mind and will remain with me for the rest of my life. It was November 13th, the anniversary of my grandfather's death 7 years previous. I stopped by the cemetery after my class, since I promised my mother I'd place a holiday wreath on my grandfather's grave before returning home. It had been snowing all morning and afternoon, so the cemetery grounds gleamed a pristine sheet of white, void of any footsteps made by the living. Upon passing through the black iron gates and entering the cemetery, I noticed how eerily empty the grounds were. Usually there was at least one other living soul in the place, but it was just me. I started my ascent up the hill toward the gravestone that marked my grandfather's resting place, the snow gently crunching beneath my boots. As I grew closer to the top of the hill, however, I realized that my grandfather's gravestone was abnormally obstructed from my view. It took me a moment to realize that someone was already there and standing before his grave, an uncommon sight, since it was usually just my mother and me who visited. I couldn't help but wonder who the stranger was, but something in my gut convinced me to remain where I stood and not make a sound. Despite the growing apprehensiveness in the pit of my stomach, I surrendered to my intuition and silently observed the figure from the back. Yet within moments, a wave of sudden realization slammed into me as my eyes absorbed the stranger's features that were unmistakably my grandfather's. Lanky body, oversized green jacket, straw hat. No, it couldn't be him. Confusion overwhelming me, I furiously rubbed my eyes together, thoroughly convinced they were deceiving me. There was no way this person 30 feet away from me was my grandfather. He was dead and buried beneath the ground. When I opened my eyes, the figure had vanished from my view. My heart thudded wildly against my chest as I raced up the remainder of the hill as fast as my shaky legs could carry me, abandoning the holiday wreath in sudden haste. Am I imagining things? I thought. Who the hell did I just see? Was there someone really here, or is my mind playing tricks on me? My heart plummeted into my stomach when I discovered a fresh set of footprints, mere inches from the gravestone. Casting a few panicked glances down at the snow-covered ground, I noticed that there were no trails of footprints going up and down the hill, other than mine. And upon glancing around the entire cemetery, there wasn't a soul to be found. I was, and had been, undeniably alone this whole time. It was then I began to hear the dull thudding of a shovel's blade against the earth. My sense of sound amplified as I remained frozen to the spot, dread slowly seeping into me. Without a doubt, I knew this was the sound of a grave being dug, the shovel blade breaking through solid ground and being brought down to do it over and over again. Except that graves hadn't been hand-dug since my grandfather died. Except there was no one else in that cemetery but me. It was then I realized this grave-digging sound was a phantom one, and it was coming right from where I stood. Any sense of bravery deserted me in that moment as I retreated down the hill, out of the cemetery, and into my car, where I drove like a bat out of hell in sheer desperation to leave the phantom sound behind me. I could still hear the sound echoing in my mind, even when I was long gone. Now, any sane person would think these experiences would scare me to the point where I'd be afraid to ever set foot in the cemetery again. But they only bring me back.
Hi, I'm Jamie Markey.
And I am a part Irish Michael Tatum.
Aren't we all?
Probably.
That's true.
This is America.
It is America.
A lot of
Hey,
Irish here.
that's
and
not-
proud of it.
Guess what, guys? We have a guest. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
This is Caitlin Glass.
Hi guys, I'm Caitlin Glass.
Do you want to tell them about yourself?
I am also part Irish.
Yeah. That's why she's here today.
That's why they asked me here.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. This comes
Yeah.
out just a couple days after, but
Yeah.
it'll be fun. It's
But
good.
if you're Irish, you'll still be celebrating.
That's right.
Happy
That's true.
St. Patrick's Day. That's right.
Yeah, you might still be hungover.
Or
Patty's
drinking
Day.
to keep from
Are you
being
Irish?
hungover.
Then yes, that's just it doesn't have to be
Yes.
St. Patrick's
That's true.
Day.
Yeah.
That's
Just
true.
any
Right.
day.
But I mean,
The Irish get such a
I
bad
know.
rap. Every culture has drunkards. It's okay.
That's
Irish,
right.
it's okay.
you're
But
just
the
more
Irish
fun
are
at it.
so
They're
eloquent.
professional about it.
And they're
They really
eloquent.
are.
Like if you've never been told a story by a drunk old Irishman in a pub.
Have you ever been told a story?
Exactly. Like the rest of it's all just derivative crap.
It's true. It's so true.
It's what every
There's
other pub
nothing.
story
Until
aspires to
you're
be.
sitting in an old tattered booth with like weird plates on the walls across from some guy that looks like Dumbledore,
Yeah.
who you maybe catch every other word because
But
his
like
accent is so thick.
like quite a bit dirtier. Than
Quite a bit
Not
dirtier
as shiny.
sometimes.
Not, yeah,
You know,
like-
he's got like a tweed.
Dirty. Oh, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
Oh, dirty, a bit dirty.
Also-
and that kind of dirty too. Like
I mean,
those are
in
the
all
kind of old
fairness,
men I like.
We have not seen that side of Dumbledore. Could have that whole other side. We just see him in professor mode.
Oh well, okay.
I like him in Jude Law mode.
Yeah, now, Jude Law can be as dirty as he wants.
Well, and apparently he gets that way. Allegedly.
I
I don't want to get in trouble.
He's not Irish though, is he?
Jude Law isn't, but here's something interesting, and I'm sorry for everybody out there listening who knows the names of all the Harry Potter actors, because I just don't. So the second actor to play Dumbledore
Michael Gambon.
is Irish.
He does
sound like-
Is he the one who was Irish? Richard Harris.
Richard Harris was Irish, and so Dumbledore, as played by Michael Gambon, gives him a slight Irish lilt as an homage to Richard Harris.
Well, Jude Law does it too. Yeah, but it's so slight. It's so
sweet.
slight
It's
that
just-
like only
it's very-
if you study dialects you pick up on it. But
Right.
if you don't, you're just like, oh well, he's good at
very
being
slight,
young
just
Dumbledore.
yeah.
Young
Oh, that's
meaning
so
still like
cool.
50 or so. Have you seen those movies?
I haven't yet. I
Sorry.
want to just because I
fun.
love Dumbledore. Like I
Yeah.
love, I
We
love that.
digress. I'm
That gave
sorry.
me
Do you
feelings.
know that Dumbledore is Old English for bumblebee?
Oh, that's
where it
adorable.
comes from. Bumblebee.
He was like the first transformer
Very first one.
ever.
Dumbledore gets around, you guys.
He does.
Well, yeah.
So, what's today's episode title? We have to have a title, right? Did we decide
Right.
on the title?
Yes,
right?
you
It's
have it.
called-
Did we already
I
say?
forget.
And this is.
Oh, and this is School Intentions.
This is why we need guests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep us
I
on
listen.
track.
Yeah.
I listen to the podcast, so I know that sometimes it takes a while before we get around to saying the title.
And I almost
Yeah.
always forget to say the title.
And I
That's
wouldn't
why I say
remember.
my name first. That's all I can remember.
one thing at a
Say my name.
time.
That's right. That's right.
I
So-
started the whole thing of adding an adjective to my name, and I'm gonna run out of them because I'm like, I don't know what I am today. This is easy because I can be like, I'm part Irish. So this episode title is An Abiding Sense of Tragedy, which comes from the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats, or Yeats, depending on how Irish you are.
Yeats.
And the quote, which is it's attributed to him, but as Where specifically it comes from, we're not quite sure, but it's a beautiful quote. It's being Irish, he had an abiding sense of tragedy, which sustained him through temporary periods of joy. This is just it's such an Irish thing to say.
Yeah.
I love the Irish. Like, I'm a book nerd, you guys. We all know this. I'm a lit nerd. And I figure, like, if it's not written by a British woman, an Irish anybody, or a Russian from about the time of the Tsars, I don't fucking care.
Right. It's true. He doesn't.
I really don't.
It doesn't make it right. It's just his opinion.
True.
It's something that you should all just take with you in general when you hear or read anything in life.
Yeah,
it doesn't make it right. It's just their opinion.
It's just their opinion. And that's
just saying,
okay.
if you're reading the Irish, the Irish.
Yeah.
Just their language, their relationship to language. There's such musicality in their everyday speech. Like when we've all been to Ireland, everyone in this room, and there's something about just the way they use language. Like they just kind of bend it almost to the point of breaking, and just to get these really great, clever quips like nay word of a lie. I just loved that when we were in Ireland. That was the guy that we were hanging out with. Like said that I was nay word of a lie, which is just a wonderful way of saying no shit.
Yeah.
Or no bullshit. I'm like, that's so elegant, and it's like the perfect little poetic foot. It's just nay word of a lie.
I love Ireland.
When I always felt like I was on an adventure of some sort.
Yeah,
Constantly.
I don't know what it is about the place. I think that regardless of how big of a city you're in, and I've only been to Dublin and Cork, but nothing there is terribly tall. The tallest things are like the old churches.
Yeah.
So you don't feel like you're stuck inside some big downtown and how are you ever going to get out?
Right.
Or it feels like an endless city of possibilities in front of you because you could just keep going.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever blocking your way.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know if the Irish feel that way, but that's what it felt like to
Yeah.
Tony and I. Being there it felt so comfortable. It just felt like being at home. And I'd never ever been. I didn't go until I was, an adult.
Same, yeah. And I've been a couple of times. The first time I went, it was in Dublin, and then I went down to Cork, and then over to I went over
Galway?
to Dingle, and up to Galway, and then over. And then the second time, it was Cork. I love Cork. It's so much fun.
Cork to me is like I love it. It's one of my favorite places on earth because it is so quintessentially Irish.
Yeah. Do you know that if you happen to be there over Easter, that you can't drink alcohol on Easter? That's like the only day they don't serve alcohol.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would believe that.
Yeah.
Seems like
it was very
the kind of place
strange.
where they'd have a rule like that.
Yeah, it was just like I am in Ireland and I can't go to the pub to get a drink.
But it's not like you can't have it. If you have it in your home,
You
go
can drink
ahead.
it, yeah.
I mean, how would they know?
It's like Oklahoma on a Sunday. But Ireland one day. It's true. It's true. Like you have to be like, are we drinking anything tomorrow? Because we got to get that alcohol today. And you have to go to you can't get full like alcohol point beer. At least when I lived there, you couldn't. Unless you go to the liquor store. And then you can't buy it cold. You have
Oklahoma
to buy it.
is
Weird.
backwards
So many
land.
weird, just putting up these barriers, and I feel like the people that make those laws don't know alcoholics very well.
No, because if you want because it's okay, just go get the cheap stuff, and just drink more of it. Or if you want, it doesn't matter if it's not cold. If you
Does it have alcohol in it? I'm gonna drink it.
Yeah,
that's right.
Oh,
Not me,
can't
but-
expect me to drink this Mad Dog warm.
Oh God!
Tastes the same cold or warm.
Speaking
really.
of drinks, we are definitely having Irish mules.
We're having
tonight.
Irish mules today.
We are.
Clink over
Clink.
the
What is it?
clink.
Slancha.
Oh,
Slancha.
what is it? Splancha?
No, slancha.
Slancha? Cilantro?
It's not.
Sriracha?
Oh gosh. You sound like part Irish, you guys.
The words, though,
now
the
Ken's
Irish
not
words
Irish.
are really what he loves.
He's an Irish, not Gaelic, so I guess we'll give him a pass.
The first time, though, I was there when I went down to Cork. So what I wanted to do when I went was go to all of these, because it fascinates me that there are just ruins from the 1100s just hanging out in someone's field.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
and
everywhere.
they're not. There's no big to do about them. It's like,
No,
oh yeah,
they're
this
just
is
there.
just and we can go on that land.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Farmer Brown has nothing that can't keep
Yeah.
you from it. It's a national treasure.
Yeah, and there's a guy that I met, and you know him as well,
Yeah.
Niall.
Nice.
Niall, and He's like the only one in Cork.
Well, to be fair, he fucking knows everybody in Cork.
He does.
And Dublin.
Yeah. He's great. And I was telling him that I was trying to go to all of these different areas, and I think I had a book that told you about the different ones where they were and everything, and I was talking about this one. He's like, oh, I know exactly where that is. Let's go there. I've never been there. So he took me, and we go, and it's super cool. It was from the 1100s, and it's this tower that's real, like, I felt so tall because I could touch the ceiling, and everybody else had to stoop to go up. And we go up, I think it was 4 stories tall, because you ended up going later. 4 stories tall, and it was just amazing. And it was, their tower to protect, and then there were ruins of the rest of it, but the tower itself, the bottom of it was full of like beer cans and like weed paraphernalia. It was like, all right, well, cool. And so
also like Oklahoma.
Yeah, very much so. It was interesting. But when we went, like, we had to walk through a field, and it was kind of rainy, and so we got muddy and all of that stuff, and we went in, and by the time I got back, it was just like everything was covered in mud, so I just packed it all into a Ziploc bag and stored it.
I'll deal with that when I get home.
Yeah, it's like, this is not worth it. It was funny, too, because it was there were a few of us there, and it was a cow pasture, and for me, like, it's not a big deal. You just make your way through the cows. But some of the people there had not been used to
cows,
and they were like, are we okay? It's like, push it. It's fine. It's not going to do anything.
It's just a cow.
It's just a cow.
It's a cow, yeah.
They're big, but...
Just don't look it in the eye.
Right. Did you look at it? Did you look at it?
Oh, you made it angry.
Oh, God.
Oh, all right.
Now
Not all of us are going to get out of this field now.
Back
but everyone
away
run.
slowly.
God bless and good luck.
Yeah, once you look at them in the eye, you can't stop looking at them in the eye.
Don't blink. Don't blink.
It's like the ghosts from Mario. Like, you give them permission to charge.
That's right.
But anyway, we explored everything or whatever, and it was really fun. And I had an amazing time. So much fun. I think I spent 10 days there the first time, and came home. And I guess after a few weeks noticed, like, there was some weird stuff going on in my house.
Oh.
Yeah, like, at the time I had a bed that had those touch lamps on the side of it. And, and it had 3 settings. And there was one on each side of the bed. So if you touched once, it was bright, and then it got dimmer and dimmer, and then went off. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would wake up in the middle of the night with that light on, and I'd turn it off and go to sleep and wake up, and it would be on. I'd turn it off, and it happened constantly. And so one time, and it was like a little creepy. It felt like, there was a dog in the house at the time, and he would freak out at stuff, like just start barking down the stairs.
Aggressively. He wasn't an aggressive.
No, he had never been aggressive before, and he would be scared, like he would be shivering and barking down the stairs, and that was really unnerving. And I would walk around the house with him and try to say, everything's okay, look, we're walking through the house. Of course, then I would be mildly terrified at the same time, and go around, and you could just see he was ready to find something and just very anxious. We'd go back upstairs, and he would turn around and start growling and barking down the stairs again. And so then one night I had done all of that with him, and he was still barking, and I was like, come on in. And I went into my bedroom and called him in with me and shut the door. And I was like, we'll just be in here for now. Just like, whatever's out there can stay out there. And then he stood up on the foot of the bed and started barking and growling at the door the same way. And I was like, oh God, it was so creepy. And then one day the lights were doing the thing, and I would make sure that I wasn't touching it and nothing was happening. And so it kept happening. So I just unplugged it. And the other light on the other side of the bed was actually plugged into a different wall that happened to be on a different fuse. And as soon as I unplugged that one, within 10 minutes, the other one started doing the same thing. Yeah.
Michael's nodding. Did he experience any of
Yeah,
this?
okay,
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. For me, not for you, for you, because you had to live there.
It was creepy. It was really creepy and unnerving. And before that, it was kind of exciting because this house was like a dead zone. It felt like there was really nothing there, and I have not had that most houses I've lived in, so it was really nice. And then it was like, what? Where did this come from? What is happening? And we went. We went to Hank's.
Yes.
Have you been there?
The German place?
Yes, it's
Yes.
so good. And we had I had a lot of German beer.
I
It's
had
the best kind if you're going to have a
It's-
lot of a beer.
Right.
Oh, it was so good.
True.
And we went, I was telling Michael about everything, and he was like, let's go investigate it. And I was like, all right, let's go investigate it. So,
Because you'll only do it if you've had a few drinks. If you're not drunk, you're like, no, fucking
no,
no.
that's a
And I'm
terrible
like, come
idea.
on, let's go. I become an 8-year-old. I'm like, but there's something outside that's supernatural and might kill us. We have to go see.
yeah, sober, he's like, ask it a question. And I'm like, I don't want it to answer. No. I'm not comfortable with that. But it was like, okay, let's go. So I remember a lot of the time I was upside down on the couch because it felt comfortable to me in that moment, and it was ridiculous. Like, because we had our
kind of ridiculous.
our
We were
phone
all
apps.
like, bruh, it was me, you and
Yeah.
Brandon.
Yeah, and we had our phone apps out, and we were walking through with our EMF detectors, right? And then
Yeah,
checking out
it's like they're
everything
all-
and seeing if
And we
everything.
had different types of phones at the
Yes, we
time.
did.
You had a smartphone. I still had my Android. And they're totally different apps
Yeah.
for this stuff. And they're just like, they're totally just BS.
Cheesy, whatever.
Cheesy, like just there to have fun. But they totally started getting weird results.
Yeah, like.
In a way that we were like, okay, this isn't fun anymore. That's not funny, you guys.
Yeah, and I've talked about this app from my phone where it would say a name,
Yes.
and have you heard that? Like, because it would say a name,
Yeah.
and most of it was crap. The first time it creeped me out, but then the rest of it was just crap, and so it was like whatever. And so he had one and they both had different EVP things, and so mine was the one that it would pick up the word that's being said in the room, and his was one that would record and ask questions, and eventually, after not too long actually, his phone would ask a question and my phone would answer it.
Ooh.
And it's not like my phone, if you asked a question to my phone, that an answer, that had never happened before.
So Brandon had his phone out too,
Yeah.
and his app was like the little radar that was like, "Ooh, want to see if we're ghosts near you," and it's just supposed to like freak you out. There's
Yeah.
nothing. It's not
It's not
detecting anything.
legitimately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you've ever been on a boat that has a fish finder, that's what it's, that's what it's.
It's kind of like that, but
Yeah.
it's total bullshit. And so so there was a moment where you were. You were like you were getting mad because it was just like the words coming up on your phone were just bullshit. It was
Yeah.
like cemetery or like rock, and you're like, oh cool, whatever, And I was out on the stairs, and Brandon was like looking. Oh, there's one at the window. There's supposed to be one over here. We're all like freaking ourselves out, just being drunk and stupid.
Yeah.
And then at some point, my phone, it would just ask, that creepy electronic voice would come out, something like, "Would you like us to stop?" And Jamie's phone immediately goes, "Yes."
Oh.
And then we're like, what? And so we all laughed, and then we're like, that's pretty good, that's freaky.
Yeah.
And then another time it said something about, like, "Where are you?" And your phone immediately, like, in perfect time, because it's the
Like it
word
was
generator
people.
is supposed
Yeah.
to be, just random. So
Random.
it'll, come up maybe a couple minutes, 30 seconds, whatever. And now it would start answering this question.
Really fast, yeah.
And so the next question, or later on, it asked a question like, "Where are you?" And it said, like, "Bathroom." And I was standing near the bathroom
Right
at
in
the
front
time.
of it, yeah.
And on Brandon's phone, a little dot came up on the radar near where I was next to the bathroom. And I was like, that's weird, guys. That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And
Maybe we should stop.
I know. And so this ended with me being upside down on the sofa. Like, my feet were on the back of the sofa and my head was on the floorish area. And I was flopping around, having a great time, and laughing at them.
meditation pose.
It was meditation. It was meditation. And then I basically just cussed whatever it was out and told it to get the fuck out of my house. I don't want you here. Go away. And then it wasn't until later that I realized it stopped. Everything stopped after that. And I had this appointment with a psychic not too much longer after that. And I was like, "Hey, so what was in my house?" That's all I asked her. And she was like, "Oh, you went out of the country and you brought something back with you, like dirt." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, like, where did you go?" And I said, "Ireland." And she was like, "Oh, you have a puka." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's a land spirit. You brought it. It saw you wherever you were, and you brought dirt back, and it came with the dirt because it was infatuated with you and wanted to see what you were doing and all of that kind of stuff. And the reason that the dog was scared is because it becomes this like creature, right? A puka is, it's a land spirit, but it often presents itself as an animal of some sort, and it does not like other animals. So it would kind of
my dog.
Yes, so it would act like it was coming at him, and it was scaring him, but he was also protecting me from it, which is sweet. Aww. And I was like, well, Dirt, I didn't bring home Dirt. And she was like, did you come home with like muddy clothes or something? And I was like, I did do that. And she was like, yeah, it was a puka. And I told her it seemed to be gone, and she said it was probably because I told it to go away. That's interesting. It went away. Yeah. And then, so then we did this convention in Ireland.
This is great.
I guess it's about 3 years ago now.
Yeah, I just want to say, because I'm going to forget. You make a joke that my dog is a puka. When we were in Ireland, is when my dog, she'd been born already, and we'd chosen her from the breeder, but at this point couldn't bring her home yet.
Right.
And the breeder would send us pictures and say, let me know when you think of a name, and we'll start using the name with the dog before you bring her
sweet.
home. Mm-hmm. And we'd been tossing around some ideas. We thought maybe another Spanish name, because Torito, our older dog, is a Spanish name. Different stuff. And then while in Ireland, we open up the email with a new picture from her, and our dog, she's a French bulldog for you folks at home, but she's pied white and red. Mm-hmm. And so her head is all red, and I said, oh, what a bonny wee puppy. And we went, Bonnie! And so our dog got her name while we were in Ireland.
Oh, how funny.
And she hates other animals, so maybe she's the little puka.
Maybe she's
She's
got a little puka.
puka.
We're all a little Irish, even
yeah.
Frenchies.
That's right. We're all a little Irish.
Okay, so then your other experience.
Yeah, so we were at a convention, and we were doing a ghost story panel. This was before, we were doing the podcast or anything, of course. But it was a huge room. We were a packed room with ghost stories.
It was like a lecture hall.
Yeah, at the college there. And so we asked, first of all, who believes in ghosts? Because it's nice to kind of get an idea. And I'd say half of the people raised their hands. Yeah. And then I start telling the story, and when I said it was a puka, the entire audience gasped collectively and started talking amongst themselves about, it's a puka.
It's a puka.
Oh, yeah.
Believers and non-believers are like,
I mean, everybody was like, no. And I was like, hold on. Like, only 50% of you believe in ghosts, but everybody in here believes in pukas, and they were all like, yes.
Well, that's when they get specific. They're like, you ask if we believe in ghosts. We don't believe in ghosts. We're fucking pukas. Absolutely. Not a ghost. A puka's not a ghost. A puka's a spirit. Mm-hmm. Different thing.
It was really funny. It was really, really funny. Yeah.
It was so great.
Yeah. It was
funny. And puka, so it makes me think, so in the play, which was made into a movie in the, I want to say the 40s or 50s, starring James Stewart, Harvey.
Yeah.
I played the character Elwood P. Dowd, the guy that sees Harvey. And for listeners that don't know, it's a delightful little movie. You should watch it sometime. And if you ever have the chance to do the play or see it, you should. It's really a lot of fun. But it's about a guy that is this wacky, fun, but very caring and warm individual who's a little eccentric, and that he has an imaginary friend named Harvey who's supposed to be a giant rabbit. And he explains to people, and like people that know him and his life are kind of like, oh yeah, it's Elwood, he's really sweet. Harvey just kind of comes with the territory, deal with it. And they kind of humor him, and the comedy comes from people that are like, excuse me, he's what? And so anyway, and it turns out at the very end, spoilers, that Harvey is real.
Yeah.
And he's a giant rabbit, and Elwood P. Dowd makes a big, whenever he explains it to people, he tells them, he's a puka.
Yeah.
He's a puka, which is really interesting. And my grandma, it was one of my grandmother's favorite plays, and this is why she really wanted me to try out for it when it came.
Aww.
She was like, oh, please do it, and I won. She was delighted. It was one of the few things she got to see me do when I started acting a lot on stage. And in her final weeks, when she was in the hospital passing away, she would occasionally come to, and she would look, and every now and again, she started calling her IV, her little whatever, the medicine stand, she started calling it her puka.
Aww.
And we all thought it was really adorable. And she's like, she always, throughout her entire life, she just made up words for things, because she's a brilliant woman, but she'd forget, like, what's that that doodad over there? You mean a chair, Mimi? Yes. Chair. That's exactly what I meant. So she just make up like doodad, doohickey, whatever, and then she started calling this thing. I need to tell the nurse about the puka, and we're like, are you seeing pukas? Yes, I'm seeing pukas. So yeah.
That's so funny. That was mine. You know what, the other crazy thing that happened the last time I was there is I went in Cork, they had the Titanic exhibit.
Oh, neat.
And I've never really been like a big find out everything about the Titanic thing. It's, I know how the movie ends. I've literally never seen the movie, though.
Oh.
Ever.
I saw it on opening night
Yeah.
as a little teenager.
Yeah, I remember it coming out.
Good memories with friends.
Yeah, but then it was just like, I know how it ends. But I ended up going with my friend Amy, and it ended up being what was it? The 105th anniversary to the day that it sank when we were there.
Oh.
And the Cork was the last stop before it took off.
Yeah, it was his last.
And so that was just
port.
when we got in there and we were talking, and then they're like, it happened
Like
105 years today. Yeah.
Oh.
And it was just like heightened the whole experience. That was kind of a weird thing too. There was every time I'm there, there's some like weird coincidences that happen, and
we had that weird experience
just
when
stumble into fun
Nyla
stuff.
took us into the old gunpowder factory, or the
Right.
remnants. It was just a field, or like a overgrown field with a few structures in it still standing, and we just kind of hung out there. And there were several of us, and Nyla and Brandon and there was someone else with us, and I can't remember his name. He was super sweet. But he went with us, and you and I kind of held back because we're like, we're getting a weird feeling. We're just going to sit right here near this tree while you guys go forward into the brush.
It's just, you're walking, and on there, it's kind of like a little pathway, and then on each side of you, there's like this old, like, gunpowder stuff, things, big
like an old,
metal
there's an old
things,
forge, and old this, that, and the
doorways
other.
and stuff like that.
Arches.
And at one point, I started to walk, and have you ever walked down a street and you passed an alley? And you felt like, oh, I need to get past this alley. You know what I mean? Like something's there. That's what it felt like. And I immediately was like, and I slowed down, and then Michael started to slow down, and he was like, are you? I was like, I am. Are you? And he was like, I am.
And we both are like, where is it right now? And I'm like, and we're like,
we pointed it out.
Count of three.
Separately.
We're like, okay, 1, 2, 3. Both point at the tree. It's like one tree of like dozens, and we're like, that one. It's right over there.
Yeah. It was really creepy.
And it didn't help that Niall had told us. Now, like sometimes when you walk out here, we just find with the walkers.
The
walkers.
The walkers.
It's just old folk. They get lonely and they just can't sleep, so they just walk. And sometimes you just talk to them. And go, hello, boyo. Let's talk to you for a second. And we're like, so sometimes you may, and they just kind of walk around. So don't be frightened of them. They're not homeless. They're just out and about. You know, and we're like, that's kind of terrifying, but I kind of want it to happen because I'm like, okay, now tell me a story.
Yeah.
Like, I've caught you. I'm just going to catch an old Irish person by the beard and be like, where's your gold?
Tell me a story.
Pokemon.
No. They're not. Allegedly.
He's got to catch all the Irish.
So what's fun is that Caitlin offered to do our hisTERROry today.
Yeah, it's kind of a combo hisTERROry, personal experience.
Yeah.
Whatevers.
Personal hisTERROry.
Yeah, so while in Ireland in 2014, Tony, that's my husband, Tony and I went on a little, I guess technically it was a ghost tour, but it's more like just a walking tour of Dublin. And along the way, because of all of the history of the place, they'll tell you dark and scary stuff because those things are legends or whatever.
Right.
So it was like November, which I guess is maybe an off season because there was no one else on the tour besides Tony and I and the guide. Just the three of us. And we went around to a variety of different places that were neat, but one in particular really stuck out, so I thought that I would share what that is all about. Yes, so the last place, if you're ever in Dublin, please look up, I think it's called Hidden Dublin, is the name of the touring, little walking tours. The last place that you will visit is called the Gates of Hell.
Ah, fun.
Isn't that nice? Yeah, because you go about and you do the whole tour, and he's like, all right, are you ready? Now I'm taking you to the Gates of Hell. And we're like, excuse me, what?
What? I feel like I should sign a disclaimer.
Is it the British Embassy?
And this was at night, but by no means was it super late. You know, maybe by the end of the tour we were reaching 10 p.m. or something. So it's not like the witching hour or anything incredibly creepy. People are out and about in the city. But so the gates of hell are located near this church whose name we looked up before we got started, and I've already forgotten. St. Audiens? St. Audens? Yeah, Audoens. So St. Audens Church. And the gates themselves are in what remains of the old wall of the city of Dublin. So it's incredibly old, hundreds of years old. Wow. And the church is situated in such a way that if you're on one side of the church, you're at a certain street level. And then if you go back around, you're going to end up going down. So where the gates are located, the gates in question, you're actually lower than like the main entrance to the church, if that makes sense. Yeah. By quite a lot. So
it's like a stories down without going down stories?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you've just walked down and around just a slope.
Okay.
The street slopes down. So on the regular level side, there are street lights, just, everything's bathed in that typical kind of orange amber street light that you find most places in the world. People are here and there, cars, and you can hear folks talking, cars going by, doors open to pubs and whatnot. But when you go around down the back, suddenly it gets a lot more quiet, though it is still lit. And then you stand and you're like, wow, look at this giant gate in an old wall. It's locked, and it's like a big wrought iron. I don't want to call it a portcullis because it doesn't lift up like that, but just think big like that.
Okay.
It's locked, but of course the guide has the key.
Of course, yes.
He has the key to the gates of hell.
He can't just show you the gates of hell.
So he's like, all right, we're going in. And Tony and I are like, okay.
Here we go.
Here we go. So we go through them. He closes them behind us, locks them behind us. So now we are locked inside this thing. But once you go through the gates, you're in an open area, like a courtyard.
Okay.
So you go through the gates and then through, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of like the little tunnel, right? To get, because it was a wall, right?
Oh,
so
right.
Through
like
through the wall
something.
section, that's just feet in depth, and then out into a courtyard. And on the left of you, a piece of wall continues to where it meets the church itself. This whole area is pretty dark. There are trees above you, and light is coming through from the road and stuff. But it's not like so dark you can't see in front of you. But nothing is in there lighting the space at all. So you could get out your phone flashlight. I think the guide had a flashlight. So we walk up to the corner of where this wall meets the church, and there we stand, and he proceeds to tell us why this place is called the Gates of Hell and what has happened here in this particular spot where we are standing. And and
it's just the two of you with the tour guide.
it's just
How
the two
great
of us
that?
and the tour guide. It's funny, I'm getting goosebumps
I know.
just thinking about it, which is not normal. I've thought about it plenty since then because it's pretty cool. So it's quite sad, but just a fact of life over the years. So St. Audens, or however you say it, is like the oldest medieval church in Dublin. And this particular area, it's like the backside door of the church is where a lot of women would come and surrender their children that they couldn't care for.
Oh.
So like, if prostitutes had babies, or maybe other people that, just had children out of wedlock, and that's where they would be left. And it's also a place where a lot of public sentencing, like to death and stuff, would happen, though the executions didn't happen there. But so sentencing and surrendering of children happened there. So just over time, just the immense sadness and tragedy
People
of
facing a major loss.
Yeah. So because we had told the guide that we were not really ghost believers or whatever, and then being on a tour with no other people, he just had to share with us, well, sometimes people here feel this and sometimes people here experience that, and that was cool, just hearing that stuff. But so typical things to be it's more a feeling, and I did feel the feeling going in there. There's like, it's new and it's dark, so that's scary, and just your pulse kind of starts speeding up because of that. But the air felt heavy, and the way it does when you get to walk into a really, really, really old place. Just all the energy of what's gone on there, and then when you consider all the energy of what's gone on here is incredibly sad.
Right.
It was tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And heavy. It's just the best way to put it. But so the guide talked about how mostly when there's a group of a dozen or so gathered there listening, once they leave that place, they'll talk of how they heard children or felt tugging at their clothes at like the knee.
Wow.
You know? Yeah. And so he would just talk, and he was telling other stories that I'll get into, and I was just watching and looking and like staring at the dark, just wondering, not really going, well, I want to see something, just taking it all in. It was pretty incredible. And then he told us a story of a particular woman, and I'll get to that. But when he ended, it's going to be the end of the tour. So we turn from our corner now up to the right, and there are stairs that lead up and around, 40 stairs, in fact, and they're the normal height of a stair, so whatever that is, 6 or 7 inches. 2 or more people can pass up them next to each other, but they're quite deep, I guess. So it takes a long time to go up these 40 stairs. So when you're standing in that little corner, you can't see where they end.
Okay.
You know, because there's a giant church in front of you that's going to let you out somewhere up there at the front of the church. So we get up there, and it lets you out to the churchyard, which would be the graveyard. Wonderful place to end. And that gate is also locked.
But he has a key.
So he can let you out. And then when it's over, he's like, well, this concludes our tour. And if you go down here and over to the right, you'll go to the oldest pub in Dublin, or the most haunted pub in Dublin. It's called the Brazen Head. It's over there. So we went to it.
Naturally.
It was great. And I'll come back to the other part.
Okay.
But it was a great tour. So now I got to open up my story right here so I get all my facts straight. He told us about a woman named Darkey Kelly. Darkey's short for Dorcas. Her name is Dorcas Kelly. And there's quite...
Dorcas, I just need to say this. That's a terrible name.
You know, I think it might be biblical, and I meant to look it up.
I think it is, actually. My mother worked with a woman named Dorcas for the longest time, and as a little kid, I thought it was the cutest name in the world, and I would always giggle.
Dorcas.
It's funny because when you hear it, you think of, dorks, D-O-R-K.
Yeah.
But when I see it, I think of orcas, the whale.
I was thinking that too.
Because that's how it's spelled. It's spelled orcas with a D at the beginning.
Yeah.
Dorcas.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just need to own that for myself.
All right. So let me tell you about Dorcas Darkey Kelly, an Irish woman who's been variously painted as an innocent victim, an evil witch, and much more recently, even Ireland's first female serial killer.
Ooh.
Whoa.
Women can do anything.
Yeah. So there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this woman, but the one thing we know for sure is that she was burned at the stake in 1761.
Oh.
That was a late time to be burned at the witch.
Burned at the
Incidentally, or burned as a witch.
usually
That was, I mean,
1600s.
that's something, because it was like usually... Like
1600s.
it was the middle.
Yeah.
It was early to mid 1600s.
So there has to be a
and by
reason.
1700s, that was a rare practice by then.
Yeah. There has to be a reason. So we've got 3 varying tales. So number 1, Darkey Kelly, victim of the Hellfire Club. So if you know anything, the Hellfire Club has been long existing in England and Ireland and the like, and it's just like a fancy aristocrats club full of orgies and debauchery and drinking and gambling and, Satan worship and sacrifice and things like that.
Right.
They're bored. They want to dabble in the occult.
It's bored rich men
guys.
like get together. It's like before strip clubs existed.
Right.
So
they
there's
made one.
There's
It's
a
like
particularly...
Whatever is.
They may have created him at one of these.
They might have.
ritual,
He's
I
a
don't know.
tulpa created by the Hellfire Club.
That Trump needs a hellfire ritual, I'll tell you what. All right, sorry.
They had a particularly heinous branch of the Hellfire Club in Dublin at the time. The infamous Hellfire Club was a secret society of noblemen obsessed with the occult who met in locations throughout England and Ireland. It was said that their meetings were experiments in debauchery and rituals with the purpose of gaining greater power and reveling in activities well outside the accepted moral ideas of the time. The famed hunting lodge on Montpelier
That's very good.
Montpelier Hill. Outside Dublin, which you can also
That's
visit.
probably the Irish
You
pronunciation.
can also visit, yeah. was said to have been host to the club's activities for an estimated 30 years, and as one of its members, Simon Luttrell, important guy to remember in this story, first Earl of Carhampton and the Sheriff of Dublin, figures famously into Darkey Kelly's tale. Darkey Kelly was a madam who owned a brothel called, I kid you not, Maiden Tower. Right, which is situated very close to this church.
Okay.
Like on Fishamble Street. We walked from that street, and now in place of the brothel is a pub called Darkey Kelly's.
Oh,
Pretty cool.
It's a convenient location.
Yeah, exactly.
You go, and then you go...
So that's
pray
how,
for forgiveness.
That's how legendary she is. They
Yeah.
named a pub after
Yeah.
her on the street where her place used to be. So.
Okay.
So this legend goes, when she became pregnant with Luttrell's child, what was he, the sheriff?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
sheriff.
She approached him demanding support and helping to raise said child. Luttrell, of course, denied that he was the father and in turn accused her of witchcraft. Kelly maintained that he took the child and sacrificed it in a satanic ritual with the Hellfire Club, but no body was ever found to support her claim. But history was not on her side. A woman accused of witchcraft hardly stood a chance, especially when her accuser was a man of power. How things just change. They're so different
I
nowadays.
know, it's not
No,
at all a
it's so
cycle.
hard to. It's just that time doesn't resonate at all
No,
anymore.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Kelly was convicted of practicing witchcraft and was throttled, which is a partial hanging, and then burned at the stake for her crimes. I have a more specific description of what that is if you guys want me to share it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
Okay,
do it.
let me go.
I
Let
feel
me
like
go.
I feel
find-
like we have to really
Let me find that
to
one.
honor her story.
I have to find
And it's
where
fair
it
warning, so that if you
went.
want to skip this part,
Yeah.
you
Well,
can.
no, it was hard to read because it was written in like really old English at the time, the description, but I found one where they spelled it out in proper English for me.
Okay.
I remember it enough. I've read enough. But basically, it was like being partially hanged first and then burned.
Yeah.
Because it's so weird. People liked to witness these executions, but the folks being burned at the stake made a horrible racket, which made it very uncomfortable to watch for too long because they're just so loud.
Yeah.
So, gosh, what can you do? Let's partially hang them first.
So they can't scream.
By the way, they only did this to women.
Well, of course.
So it's
Well, if those women weren't screaming so loud, they wouldn't have to.
so it's like the post that the woman would be tied to with the stuff for the pyre built beneath her had extra stakes in it up higher, and she was hung by the neck from those, but there were also chains supporting her like under the arms. So
Okay.
they'd hang her first, and once she'd essentially passed out from that after
Yeah.
15 minutes or so of hanging,
Oh, jeez.
they would cut that rope, and then she would fall down, and the weight of her body and the chains would kind of lift her arms up above her head so she wouldn't slump down into the fire entirely, but it would just then consume
Oh.
her.
Well, that's very creative. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty
You know why the
disgusting.
slumping thing, why that is because if this is awful, and this is a horrible detail, but if you ever find yourself burning alive, the quickest way to go so it doesn't like consume you or you're not alive to feel it consume you is to just stick your face into what's burning and just breathe it in.
Yeah.
Because you'll
because
die
it-
from
it-
the smoke.
Well,
right?
you'll die from like just breathing it in like
The
that.
heat.
Apparently, just so quickly it'll cauterize your lungs immediately, and everything else. So it kills you a lot quicker. And they figured this out because execution was a whole industry, and they're like, how can we keep them alive the
To
longest to
torture
the
them
maximum
more.
pain? And so the chains were there to keep her from slumping forward and getting the chance of breathing the fire in before it consumed her from toes to toe to head, which was just fucking awful. Like who thinks of this shit?
Yikes.
Ugh.
Version 2. Darkey Kelly, practitioner of dark magics. This version of the tale involves almost exactly the same players from the first, but there's no mention of Luttrell being a member of the Hellfire Club. Darkey Kelly knew the sheriff because he visited her brothel on Fishamble Street. It was here, Luttrell reported, that Kelly cast spells on him to try to extort money from him and force him to fall in love with her. She tormented him with her magic until he brought formal charges against her. Kelly was tried in a brutal fashion, as in the previous story, sentenced to death for the crime of witchcraft, throttled and burned for her crimes, and her brothel was shut down after her death. Knowing how the ripple effects of these trials often progressed, it's a wonder that all the women who worked for her at the brothel were not also brought up on charges of witchcraft themselves, which, kind of takes away some credibility.
I bet she just, like, rejected him. And he was like, I'll give you all my money. And she's like, no, dude. And he was like, I love you. I want to be with you forever. And she's like, gross, get off. I'm not into it. And then he was like, you're a witch. You made me feel this way. And why would I feel this way if you weren't into it? You must be a witch.
She's like,
I'm a professional. I'm just good at my job.
Right, exactly.
It's terrible. That's terrible.
I mean, she owned it.
Yeah.
She was a business owner.
Now, number 3, Darkey Kelly, serial killer. Of all the stories surrounding her, this may be the most fascinating. In this version, there's no talk of witchcraft, no Hellfire Club. Instead, after much research, historians have come to agree that Kelly may have actually been a serial killer, the first of her kind in Ireland. It seems that the Madam of the Maiden Tower was accused of murdering a shoemaker by the name of John Dowling. The crime took place on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh!
It says in 1760. But I thought she didn't die until 61, but whatever. During their investigation, authorities performed a thorough search of her brothel. Upon entering a vault within the building, they discovered 5 more bodies. All of the victims were male, and it was believed that Kelly had murdered them all and stashed their bodies away to hide her crimes.
Oh.
The trial took no time at all. Kelly was sentenced to death. Oddly enough, at the time, a man convicted of such a crime would have simply been hanged. Kelly, however, was hanged and burned, which was the punishment not only for witchcraft, but also for a murderess, which offers an interesting glimpse into the thought processes of the time.
Yes. But that's weird, too, because a lot of the times, if it was a woman that murdered, they were actually more lenient.
Weird.
Like, a lot of times she would go to prison, but they wouldn't put her to death because it was kind of looked down on to put a woman to death.
She killed 5 people and she was a prostitute.
Yeah,
so.
Right. And I mean, with the fire thing, there had to have been some witchcraft thrown in there for flavor, at least.
Well, and also bear in mind too,
want to be discovered.
Again, by the mid to late 1700s, like, it was not that common. Witch trials weren't as common as they had been. They still happened, but they were exceptions to the rule.
Right.
And so because tastes just changed. I mean, everyone kind of learned their lesson from the witch trials in England and of course in Salem, and so the stuff didn't come up. When it did, it was serious, but it didn't come up all the time. People were very conscious of it, and there were opposing views. Like, people were capable back then and like, that's bullshit. There's no such thing as witches. I mean, that was a prevailing view among many cosmopolitan types at the time. So it could be that the charges of her being a murderer were also just tacked on to be like, oh, if you don't believe in witches, but you believe in murder, right? So we all agree we gotta kill her. Like, I mean, that was like, it's bullshit either way. Like, whether the witch was for, that was what she was called for the cheap seats, and murder for everyone that didn't believe in witches. But we're like, well, she's a murderer. We can't whatever. Yeah. So it feels like it was all fucking made up, because she was a woman who pissed off someone in power, a sheriff no less.
Well, and it seems odd that the serial killer thing wouldn't be until recent.
Like, I don't know why that is, but
that would have been everywhere. She killed 5 men, so.
I feel, if I remember correctly, our guide told us that version of kind of all-encompassing. He gave us all the information, but while the serial killer story is the most recent, I don't know how recent. It's not like 5 years ago they discovered. I feel like it's longer.
It's probably been around for a while, and they've only called her a serial killer since the name serial killing has been around.
Maybe that's what it is, yeah.
But, because there've been people that have murdered lots of people before, and they've known, but they just called them, like,
I like the
werewolves.
The end of this one was fun, though. It said that the prostitutes who had worked for Kelly at the time held a raucous wake to mourn her, which ultimately turned into a riot in the streets.
I love that.
13 women were arrested and imprisoned for disturbing the peace and damaging property.
I love them.
Something else that's really interesting, though, is that the origins of the whole pregnancy by Luttrell and witchcraft story, there's a little offshoot of that. They think that part of the story being attributed to Kelly is newer than what actually happened. Luttrell had a son named Henry, who in later years also, I guess, became the sheriff or the earl or whatever. And he frequented a brothel, and it may have been Kelly's brothel, but of course she's dead by this time. And there's like a young girl. How does it go? But it's all about Luttrell's son is the one who either impregnated a young girl or was interested in a girl he raped her. That's what it was.
Okay.
And then nobody could prove anything. And then prostitutes from the brothel came forward and said, no, she actually works for us. Like, she looks like a kid, but she's a working kid. And so, really horrible stuff. And then they just kind of tacked that, got tied into the Darkey Kelly legend. But either way, she was a real person.
She was a real person.
And she really did
get burned at
the stake.
Brutal, awful way.
So now just to wrap it up, now she's known as the Green Lady of St. Audens because she's seen haunting the steps there.
Really?
Those very steps,
the steps that you were
we walked
walking
up,
up.
but she never goes inside. And people say maybe because she doesn't feel worthy of entering a church, or is she there because if she did have a child, no one could ever find evidence of it. Was it taken by Luttrell and sacrificed? Or is she there just because spirits of children are there? Whatever. So that's kind of how she remains in legend. So after we visited and then went on to the pub and said goodbye to our guide, and Tony told me that he was really surprised when we got up the steps and around the side of the church to find that the gate at the top was locked. Because while we were down there listening to the story, he swears he heard someone walking on those steps and didn't think anything of it because, like I said, it wasn't terribly late. And while that one gate was locked, he didn't know what was up there.
Right, they could have come down and gone back up.
Exactly. He thought it could have been another tour, it could have been anything. And that he saw someone out of the corner of his eye, like someone in white.
Bitches in white!
Bitches in white!
Yeah. And so, yeah.
What?
Weird, right?
That is weird.
Oh, that's a great
That's
story.
really
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Oh my
Was it
God.
super fun to dig into history? Yeah, you
yes,
did.
it was. It was also a little bit frustrating because, it's been, I guess, 4 or 5 years since then, and I just wish that I could remember the story exactly as the guide told it, because he knows it inside and out.
Right.
And it's not the same when you go looking online to try and figure it out.
It's true.
But,
Yeah, it's true.
Oh,
but it was
so
great.
good, though.
It's worth it. Going on those little tours, whether you're into ghosts or not, they're just so fun because you learn so much.
Yeah, I love a ghost tour because you get a different version of history besides just the famous people. You get the people that
regular
people and what it was like for those people and the drama and
Ghost tours really they do a lot to keep otherwise forgotten history alive.
I agree.
Because people will go because it's foul ghosts and stuff. Like, we're gonna learn about, like, I'd never heard of this, Dorcas Kelly before, and I'm like, what an awesome, like, I shouldn't say awesome, like a positive thing, but what a good story to know. I mean, like, what an instructive thing. And I'm like, it wouldn't, they wouldn't be in a history book necessarily unless you were a historian digging for that kind of stuff. So, like, that's awesome.
I have pictures too, so I'll have to send them to you.
Send them to me. We'll
yes.
put them on the Instagram.
And it'll make more sense, like my description of the churchyard and everything.
Awesome.
It's pretty neat.
Oh yeah. That's
The gates of hell.
That's
During the
exactly
day.
what I imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put it up there for you.
Cool.
Okay.
Oh,
Michael, were you gonna fill us in on something?
I guess we could bring it home with a couple of weird little,
Tell us weird
little folklore
stories. Yes.
issues that I had some experience of as a kid, because I had 2 very eccentric sets of grandparents on both sides, and a lot of Irish.
I never would have guessed that.
I know. I guess I was it skipped a generation. But so I had my, on both sides of the family, now on one side, my mother's side, very, very Irish. Very Irish. On my dad's side, they're more Welsh, with a little bit of Irish in there as well, but they're more proud of their Welsh. But on the very Irish side, my mother's side, my grandfather used to like to tell me, because they were very into Irish stuff in general, very, very proud Irish. And which is interesting, like historically, they didn't celebrate St. Patrick's Day because we're descended from Irish Protestants. So it was a no-no to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. That's a Catholic thing. We don't do that. And so if my grandmother ever caught you wearing green on St. Patrick's Day, she'd pinch you anyway, because it should have been orange. Because my family was from Antrim, or that side, which is very, very, very northern Ireland. And but my grandfather used to love to say that his side of the family were descended from the Sidhi, which is the sort of, or the Tuatha Del Danann, the wee folk, the fairy. It's fancy Irish names for the good neighbors, the wee folk. There's so many.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting how, they're thought to be, in modern times, fairies and elves and all that are thought to be very diminutive and quaint, and we think of Tinkerbell and the good fairies from Sleeping Beauty and whatnot, but they're much more menacing than that. There's much more relationship to what we now think of as like demons and goblins and things like that. They were all kind of we've talked about this before with poltergeists being that was a popular term that actually grew popular because it was a convenient umbrella term for a bunch of different folklore concepts that they were just let's give it one name, guys, because we have too many names for these things. But they at one time, especially pre-Christian pagan beliefs, these were all very distinct creatures with their own hierarchy, their own MOs, their own stuff. And but they're thought to be the Sidhi, the Tuatha Del Danann, were thought to be, and my grandfather used to speak in this made-up language that he would tell me was like a fairy language, and he would teach it. It was totally made up, as far as I know. But what's really cute about it is when a few years ago he passed away at the ripe old age of 89, and his memory had started to go in the past couple of years of his life, sadly, which so many stories that were lost because of that. But I remember the first time I went to go see him after he'd been moved into the memory unit, and my mother had told me, like, it's not gonna be Grandy as you remember him. Like, he may not recognize you. And I was like, come on, I just saw him like a month ago. She's like, it got bad really quickly when they moved him. It's happened sometime. Now, fortunately, he did kind of regain his memory for a little while once he adjusted to life in the new place. But when I first saw him, he had this moment where he did not recognize me, and I was like, this is the man who raised me, and I was terrified by this, and I just kind of looked at him, and on instinct, I just started speaking to him in our little made-up language, and he remembered, and he started talking back to it. I was like, oh my god, it's real!
That's so great!
Elves and fairies are real. But that's not the story I wanted to tell you.
Oh, I liked it anyway.
No.
He also told me, and my grandmother backed him up on this, and my grandmother was a very no-nonsense woman who was like, oh, whatever, it's fine, so my grandmother, who was very no-nonsense, would still like, oh yeah, that's the legend in the family, was that our family had a banshee. And you guys know what banshees are. Yeah, they are spirits of women. They are thought to be of the wee folk, of the good neighbors. They're in that hierarchy. And they are spirits of usually very hideous-looking women. I don't know whether they're actually hideous or whether the people that see them are like, oh, they're ugly because the circumstances are usually ugly. But they are often attached to a family, and they're lamenters, they're keeners. Keening is a kind of Irish lament, mourning. It's a traditional.
Cry, yeah.
It's a type of crying. It's somewhere between singing and crying. It's a weird. If you've ever heard a real keener, it's really eerie.
It's like a throat singer, but sad.
It's yeah, kind of, yeah. And people would make their living off this. People, in Ireland and England, but mostly in Ireland and Wales, would be professional keeners that would go and for days, while the body was in state, would hang out in the home and keen, because it was to honor the dead, but it was also to, like, I guess, keep bad spirits away, because the sound was really similar to wearing a mask on Halloween. You basically just you beat the scary things to the punch by being more scary.
Right. Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
That was part of the thinking. So but it grew out. The keening tradition, at least in part, is thought to have grown out of the belief in banshees, which foretold the death of a member of the family, or foretold of something dangerous. Like sometime there are some accounts of people on the road, seeing a woman by a river washing her hair or washing laundry and keening. Which is a very eerie sound, so you'd hear it long before you'd see the person, and you just go the other way and learn later that, oh, had I gone forward, I would have died.
They have a kind of a bad name, like they're bad luck, but in reality, it's more like a warning.
Yeah.
and it's the people who don't heed the warning that have the bad luck. So they're actually very helpful.
They're very helpful, but they are thought to foretell. They're not harbingers of
no.
death. They're just messengers.
They're just more like,
yeah,
P.S. death.
P.S. This person's gonna die, and if you
Yeah.
hear that keening, it means it's time to.
It means whoopsie's ghost.
Whoopsie's ghost, right? But my grandfather and my grandmother believed in them. I've never heard a banshee. I've heard professional keeners before, but I've never heard a banshee that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But my other grandparents, who also had a bit of Irish, they're mostly Welsh. My other grandparents believed wholeheartedly in a lot of weird things. Also very Christian as well, but they had a lot of Irish and Welsh folk belief kind of mixed in that they had just gotten from their parents, who I think their parents were off the boat. I think they came over when they were children, so it was kind of in their living memory to be like, oh yeah, we just kind of grew up with this. These are the people that one afternoon my brother and I as children were playing over there, and I don't know, I had gotten hold of a broom and I was chasing him with it, and in the process of like sword fighting or whatever, I hit him with the bristles end of the broom, which is a very, 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 very bad thing to do apparently. And they made this huge fucking thing out of it where like we were both in a lot of trouble because of it. My grandfather and my grandmother had to like sit me down. They stood my brother up in the middle of the kitchen, and they took out like Morton's seasoning and like sprinkled like a salt circle around him.
Morton.
And like broke the broom in half and put it inside the circle and did this whole thing, and I had to pray, and it was like, what? And then they buried the broom in the backyard.
Right.
And they had to go get a new broom, and it came out of my allowance.
Well, you had cursed him.
I didn't know. No one told me. No
Yeah.
one sent me down to have this conversation
No one told me.
that I couldn't come after my brother with the broom.
Yeah. And it's because the broom is in charge of sweeping filth away. And so if the part that has filth is being put onto someone, they catch that filth. And it can make them very sick, and it can, bring bad luck and things like that. So they just didn't want him to die.
And
That's
nice.
nice.
They were loving in their way. But they believed wholeheartedly in the Clearys, which was kind of a derivation of Clyricon. Now, Clyricons are related to, it's a type of Irish fairy folk spirit, and they're related to leprechauns, and they're very similar. Like, someone's described them as like they're basically leprechauns on a drinking spree. Because they have a lot of the same features, except they're always alone. They don't come in. They're never seen in groups like the famous fairy troops, the dancers and things like that are seen. They're always individual. They tend to haunt breweries and pubs and distilleries, or just people's homes if they drink a lot. Drink a lot. And so they would leave out, and they're supposed to, like, apparently one of the beliefs that my grandparents had was if you didn't leave offerings out for them once or twice a night, or a week rather, I forget what the time frame was, but if you didn't offer something for them at night, then your garden wouldn't grow, or your garden would straight up be fucked up. Like, they'd get mad and just like go through it and like dig things up, and there go the tulips and the azaleas or whatever. And my grandmother and grandfather totally believed in it, took it very seriously. Now, when I was a kid, they used to leave out bowls of milk, but I found out later that they actually left out bowls of booze in the milk. Which I was talking to my father about this earlier, because I was like, yeah, as a kid, I was like, I think it's just like cats or raccoons or something just getting it, of course, and drinking it. But then to think that they were actually leaving out booze, and I'm like, there were probably a lot of drunk alley cats in that neighborhood.
I know.
Which is like, oh, well, that's the keening.
Yeah.
That my other grandparents were hearing. It all comes together. It's all a rational explanation. But yeah, they totally believe in that. And I will say, my grandmother had a lovely garden.
Well, there you go. We do fairy stuff with the girls in our garden. Did it last summer. And so we have little furniture and stuff.
That's adorable.
We don't do, because I know they have like you can do a pot that's a fairy garden, and it's just like a little, like a dollhouse outside, but for fairies. But we don't do that. We go and we hide the chairs, we have a little, like a seating area, and we put that on a stump. And then something else is maybe under a flower, and they kind of move stuff around all over. And we put a little, I need to get a thimble, but we had a little spoon, like a plastic spoon part, just the scoopy part, and to put a little honey in there and put it out. And then they went out and they were like, it's gone! And at the time we had a rat in the back. And I was like, what? It must be a fairy. And then Serafina
Rats
was
could
like,
take that form of
fairies
fairy.
aren't real, are they? And I said, I don't know. Have you ever seen one? And she said, no. And I was like, well, then how do you know?
Yeah, how do you know?
She totally went with
don't
it.
know?
She was like, that's true. I have never seen one, so I don't know.
Great. That's
It was
great.
really great. So we have a little magical, but yeah, I haven't done that since they left and the garden's shit. So maybe I need to
Take care of your fairies.
take care of my fairies a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the actual
Little
fairies
bowls
are
of-
not, like, there are certain areas some people won't go. Certain areas of water they won't cross
Yep.
because that's where the fairies are, and
Yeah.
you gotta stay away from it because the idea is they'll take you with, to the other.
Yeah. That's where the concept of the changeling comes from, is that like fairies were thought to kidnap children and put one of their own in its place.
Yeah.
There's a school of thought. I haven't said that phrase
You
in a long time.
haven't.
There's a school of thought that thinks that tradition comes from parents who suddenly whose child is stricken with some form of mental illness. Only after they're a certain age old, like perhaps. Or perhaps they have Asperger's or autism, because they're usually the parents in folklore traditions, people that would say that their kid just wasn't the same anymore, like they were just different, like they were just kind of distant, half asleep, whatever, and they never got out of it. And so out of that arose this tradition that their real child had been plucked away by the fairies and was probably living it up in
Fairyland.
in fairyland.
Yeah.
And as royalty or something, while they just left, one of their own that was like thought to be like a poor approximation of a human child that they had kind of spirited into being to kind of provide, the parents with, it's like Indiana Jones leaving the rock on the, on the booby trap,
Right.
But that's the concept of the changeling comes from. So this
Yeah.
is really good of, what's the book called? It was a really popular book. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell deals a lot in that. It's a fictionalized like story, but there deals a lot in that great like magical folklore of the wee folk, and it's really really good. It's really good. It's a long read, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So
that's our. I guess that's it.
that's our St. Patty's Day.
Thank you,
It's a good
Caitlin,
one.
for joining
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Is there anything you want to pimp out?
Oh, I don't know. You can follow me on social media.
There you go.
Do it.
Mainly I'm on Twitter, and it's at Caitlin's Voice. CAITLINS Voice. That's Caitlin spelled the Gaelic way.
There we go. Thank you. I appreciate your story.
You've been an amazing
It was
guest.
fun.
Yes, you have that.
It was fun, guys.
We're glad to have another guest back in here. We haven't had one in quite a while, so
Yeah.
we are. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our third guest.
Feels special because I listen to your show all the time.
I know. We
Not
feel
on
special
it.
that you listen. That makes us happy.
Oh,
And thank you, everybody else, for listening. I guess that's it for today. Please make sure you give us good reviews and give us high ratings and all of those things. Follow us as well on social media, School Intent on Twitter, and Ghoul Intentions on Instagram, and the Ghoul Intentions fan page as well.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You can go to ghoulintentions.com for all those, to access to all those social media sites, and where you could submit your own story to be considered for as our cold opening for a future episode, and where you can go and you can find merch. We love to see pictures of you guys in the Ghoul Intentions shirts, which are super awesome and
Well, and
comfy.
also, you can send us, we use a lot, now that we're doing the Ghosticles, we use a lot of those stories for Ghosticles too, so we definitely need those stories to keep coming in, and we thank you everybody there so good.
Very, very true.
Very good, yeah.
And I guess we come to the part where now you have.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a quote for me
I
today?
do have a quote for you.
Ooh, excited.
I had to text it to myself. Let me find it. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm so not ready, but I might as well.
Did you see it?
Caitlin's very happy.
Chekhov? Well, this here is McCoy. We find a Spock, we got us an away team.
I feel like it's too obvious. It can't be what I'm thinking. Okay.
Chekhov? Well, this here's McCoy. We find a Spock, we got us an away team.
No, it's not. It's not. It's a reference to Star Trek, but that's
But
not what
it's
it's
not.
from.
No.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, let's think about what our theme is today.
Irish. Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right. All right. Say it again.
Okay.
I love this. I feel like the person on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that's
I
like
know.
trying to logic out an answer. Like you can't. You either know it or you don't. Like
Right,
there's no
okay.
like. Well, maybe. I guess it could be the moon.
Yeah, you may not have ever seen this one.
There's a lot of things.
Have you seen? It's Boondock Saints.
Oh, damn it! I have seen it, and I love Boondock Saints, and I didn't know that.
It's Murphy McManus, who's Norman Reedus, of course.
I'm sorry. I'll go.
It's all right.
I'll just leave.
It's okay.
Kaylin, do you want to be the permanent co-host?
Oh, no. I don't have any ghost stories. I told my one story.
He's just. I'll get you an easier one next time.
No, don't do it.
I thought you would have seen it and that you would have known it.
I did. I'm just really bad at remembering quotes from movies.
That's
guess. All right. I mean, I've seen it. I saw it like twice in my life, and I loved it. But it has been a while.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go watch it again.
You should. It's great. Everybody should watch it.
It is a great movie.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you want to say it with us?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, it's okay to sleep with the lights on.